Back. I have mostly recovered from my computer crash yesterday and was able to get most of it restored. So that's positive. And I'm back on my laptop today going live for corporate compliance. Today is our topic, and um, most agencies do a good job with this. And really, the challenge is translating what your corporate compliance program is into real life. And that's where the challenge is taking compliance from your policies and procedures and truly applying it to everything that your clinicians are doing every day. So corporate compliance is really going to be your reporting to the government and different entities. So, changing of ownership, abuse, neglect, fraud, your processes for maybe your integrity hotline is part of your compliance program. A lot of larger companies have an integrity hotline. Most smaller agencies just have a compliance officer, and that's one person. Usually, the PI coordinator is the most common person that I see designated as the compliance officer. And that's a person who handles the grievances or complaints or any allegations of abuse. And that is kind of the core components of the compliance program, is having those policies and procedures in place for how you handle reporting of different areas for compliance. Like I said, fraud, abuse, waste, anything like that. And then the process is in place to prevent those things from occurring. An example of that would be like your marketing materials, that you include reporting numbers to related entities, whether that be your accreditation body or CMS, Medicare, etc., in your marketing materials about fraud, waste, and abuse. For example, patient rights and responsibilities, which we'll talk about more specifically next week. But ethical practices around transparent communication is a big part of it. So having those things, again, in your marketing communications and your policies and procedures are going to be really key in making sure that that's communicated. But one example that I experienced personally was really a lack of understanding of how compliance translated to practice. So we had an EMR where the button just said sign and acknowledge IDT. Well, in our case, that should have been the medical director signing, because when you were clicking sign, that was signing all the patient's physician orders and closing out IDT as a meeting. Well, we had several directors or patient care managers who were running those IDT meetings and clicking that sign and close IDT. I think the realization was there that they were signing that the orders were completed and they were logged in, as the person completing IDT, but the intention wasn't there to commit fraud or say, I'm the physician, I'm the medical director, I'm signing. But that doesn't matter. So your compliance program has to be clear about what roles have what scope, how that's going to be managed. And it has to come from the leadership, which, if you're in this group, is probably you. So you, as the leader, need to be setting a clear standard for compliance and explaining really clearly what the expectations are, what's acceptable behavior, what's not, and making sure your staff really understand that in healthcare, you may just feel like you're clicking a button, but you could be doing something fraudulent. If you're not the physician, you can't click the sign button, and you have to know that that is fraudulent, even if that's not your intention. So, those are the areas where corporate compliance can get muddy, because if the leader isn't clear on those processes and isn't addressing that when they see it and putting the education in place and putting very clear processes in place around those areas that can be confusing or unclear as far as what's acceptable practice and what's not, then you can end up with fines. There was I believe there was a DOJ investigation into that issue. The physician reported it to CMS or the DOJ and said that they're signing in as me, they're signing my physician's orders. I didn't sign this, I didn't approve this, and it went a lot further than that. It resulted in quite a bit of fines and distress for all the staff that were involved in that. Certainly that person did not intentionally do anything wrong. And so that was very distressing for them to be involved in and to feel like, they were in that position. So I think really clear communication around transparency in processes and what you're doing when you're using the EMR. It's not just clicking a button in healthcare. You're agreeing that you have done something and that you're the right person and appropriate person to do it. So that's a big part of compliance that staff need to understand. And they also need to feel confident reporting that. I think sometimes the way that is handled can prevent staff from believing that they can report. And then, sometimes they don't know how, or it's in a small agency, the relationships are there. So they feel like they have to go above that leader to do that reporting. And that's painful sometimes too, especially as a leader when your staff go above your head and call the corporate hotline. That's not an enjoyable feeling. I know that's not the ideal outcome, but that could show you that your compliance program at the branch level needs some improvement or needs some more communication or needs some remessaging or some culture building around that. So essential components for the policies and procedures would include your established program compliance. That includes, at a minimum, implementation of written policies, procedures, and standards of conduct, designating a compliance officer or a compliance committee, conducting training and education, having open lines of communication, and performing audits to monitor and ensure compliance is occurring, and then establishing disciplinary guidelines that are public for agency staff for failing to comply with the policies and procedures, including any applicable regs, and then prompt response to any detected offenses through corrective action. So you should definitely be making sure that staff understand that just because they report something doesn't mean that there won't be unintended consequences of that. Again, like the story I mentioned, there were unintended consequences pretty significantly for that company. They had to change all of their processes around the interdisciplinary meeting and around the physician logins and do a lot of education and really completely restructure their processes around those actions to make sure that didn't happen again. So let me know if you feel confident with your current compliance program, what questions you might have for survey or accreditation around compliance. Generally, unless it's a complaint survey or someone has called in something like that situation we discussed, as long as you've got your compliance policies in place and your staff can speak to those, who would you report fraud or abuse to? Those type of questions, you're probably good to go with the corporate compliance plan. But I'll post a couple of questions in there that the surveyors might ask and see how comfortable you believe your staff would be answering those. So you want to make sure your staff is really competent in answering surveyor questions around reporting and fraud and abuse. So feel free to share any questions or comments in the box, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Bye.